Hello and welcome to another episode of Autogefühl, today with me, AJ. The iconic Porsche 911 Turbo celebrates 45 years this year, and therefore we have here with us the new 992 generation 911 Turbo. As you can see behind me, we have brought it here to the Hockenheimring racetrack to put it through its paces. Stick around and we'll see what it's capable of. With every generation, it always gets a little bit bigger, but nevertheless, with the Turbo, it still retains its three main fundamental pillars. That is performance, of course, but as well as luxury, and of course also the usability. You also get different design packs with the 992-911 Turbo, including a sports design pack, which has more aerodynamic extensions, side fins and diffusers, as well as a lightweight pack which removes the rear seats, which also has less sound deadening and things like that to reduce some weight. But in the standard version, here in this dark navy blue color with that beige cream interior, I think it looks a little bit more dignified. Up front, again, as always, this is a little bit wider now. In the front track, it's grown by 42 millimeters, and the rear track has grown by 10 millimeters. Up front, very iconic design now with these vertical fins right here in the front. At the lower part of the bumper, gives a nice flanking aerodynamic look to it. And as we know from the 992 generation, a square cut front bonnet. Porsche LED matrix system for these headlamps with these gorgeous kind of like lashes, these vertical slats here, ringed by this chrome as well. And again, a very sleek, low profile bonnet, again, because there is no engine up here in the front. And overall, still maintains that traditional 911 Turbo look, but brings it up to the 992 generation of design. With the wider track, with the new generation of Turbo, the front is now 1.84 meters wide and the rear is 1.9 meters wide. As always, you have 20-inch wheels up front and 21 inches at the rear. This new generation also brings with it enhanced adaptive aerodynamics as well. There's also, for the first time, the sports exhaust pack as well as the sports chassis available, which lowers the chassis by 10 millimeters and has a much more stiffer suspension. You also have revamped brakes with these nice red color calipers, but overall it still retains that classic 911 silhouette, that coupe roofline as well. Carbon fiber roof, by the way, to reduce that weight. And again, flush door handles. Not really any design lines here. It's just all about smooth, elegant, curving lines. But you have a little bit of accentuations lower down with the side skirt. And of course, the intake for the engine, which is, again, as we all know, here in the rear. And overall, this is perhaps my favorite view of the 911, this three-quarter view with the large shoulder and this really wide track now. It just has such an amazing road presence. The Turbo continues to have rear axle steering, and I also really like these chrome slats which are right on top of the engine bay here. Very typical Turbo wing, which is also part of that enhanced aerodynamics that we see, adaptive wing as well. A large central LED strip which connects the two rear lights, which again we've seen here before in the 992 generation as well, and Porsche stamped right below that with the 911 Turbo. And as we go down, again, you guys, like I mentioned, we do have the option of the sports exhaust, but here we have the more typical Turbo exhaust. But as you can tell, the outside casing is just cosmetic. The actual exhaust tips, albeit there are quad tips, so there's a dual tip on each side, they are nestled behind this outside casing. But also you have the diffuser in the rear, so it still retains that very 911 Turbo design, instantly recognizable from the back. So as we all know, the engine in the 911 is in the back, which means you have a frunk. And the 911 Turbo continues to have a very usable frunk, which is very rectangular, has a lot of volume, so you can easily fit a couple overnight suitcases, a couple rucksacks, and let's not forget it's a 2+2 seater, which means the rear bench is also useful to drop in some bags. You also have gas charged struts, so the everyday sports car. Powering the 992 turbo is a new 3.8 litre boxer 6-cylinder petrol turbocharged engine, which makes 580 PS, which is 40 PS more, that's metric horsepower, and 750 Newton meters, which is 40 Newton meters more. It does 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 2.8 seconds, which is also 0.2 seconds faster than before, with no overboost limit. So that means, if you guys remember, this turbo makes the same amount of power and torque as the previous generation 911 Turbo S. It made it to a 8-speed PDK, which is the double clutch transmission, 4-wheel drive, and the VMAX is 320 kilometers per hour. Now, the 3.8 Boxer 6 Turbo has symmetrical VTG turbos, which are variable turbine geometry with electronically controlled bypass valves, a redesigned charge air cooling system, and use of piezo injectors. Now, what does all those fancy words mean? Basically, it means that the engine is a lot more responsive, it revs a lot freely, and therefore it should be more fun. But is it? Here we have the key fob, very sleek, and when you unlock the door handle pops out, and then, wow, pretty hefty door. And this is one of the things I like about Porsche. The weight of all of the systems, so the door, the buttons, steering wheel, everything has a nice, heavy, built to last, high quality kind of feel to it. And this is the same as well. The materials on the door are also very high quality, very soft touch plush materials on the top. Interesting 3D texture along the top here with this chrome insert as well. Here, as expected, you do have animal skin leather, but it's in a lighter color, and I always prefer light colors for interiors. Maybe not for sports cars, but the 911 Turbo is kind of the embodiment of luxury, performance, and usability all in one. It's one of the few sports cars that can achieve this. Therefore, I think with this lighter interior, you have a little bit more of that luxury. And if we look here at the bottom of the door, you also see more storage spaces over here as well as over here. And this is the optional Burmester audio system, which sounds really nice. Hopping inside, well, it's not that difficult, but this is a 911. This is a sports car, so you have to stoop down a little bit. But once you're in, this is an impeccable driving position. The steering wheel and the instruments are the first things that grab your attention. They're so easy to read, they're so bright, and yes, the steering wheel has a nice grip to it. The materials on the dash are also fantastic. I also like the detailing in terms of this kind of shelf here with that textured pattern that we saw on the door is also on the top. A dash of chrome just below that. Everything has a nice weight, knurled finish. Everything makes a nice clicking sound. There's a good combination of buttons and touchscreen, which, by the way, this is a nice new 10.9-inch touchscreen. Maybe the one thing that I wish was a little bit different is perhaps maybe this gear shift lever, but we've seen this for quite a long time now already, and I guess it's up to all of us to make our peace with this. But a lot to talk about, so hop inside and let's go through them one by one. The first thing that you really notice is that beautiful tachometer right in the middle. All of the colors and the lights are so vivid and bright. It's I think one of the most well executed instrument clusters. That being said, though, however, in this new version, it's really hard to see the other two dials at the far end, and we'll talk about that in a second. But as we have our attention to this side, so as we see with the other Porsches, you have a lot of different, very familiar screens that you can toggle on the right screen. So you have, in this case, the Sport Chrono, which you can start, and then it also reflects on the chrono on the dashboard. Stop and then reset that, for example. And then you can go back, and then we can see the G-force meter, how the all-wheel drive system is distributing the power between the front and the rear axle, tire pressure monitoring, performance, and then of course the different the driving modes. You have the wet, normal, sport, sport plus, and individual. But and yeah, of course, trip. navigation, in which case the large in the entire screen becomes the navigation, including that smaller gauge on the far right. But this is where, you know, I don't know, you have to really peer through the steering wheel to see this edge of the screen, and the same thing holds true for the other side. So you can also change the settings. If you click on the button here, you get to choose between the left and the right, and then here you can see, for example, the navigation, your speed limit, the adaptive cruise control distance, and some other parameters. But the temperature and the clock, which is all the way on the far left, is a bit too far away to see. This is very typical of the turbo with all of these dials, but I don't know, somehow I'm not sure how they could have made this better, and that's a little bit of an issue. But ultimately, what you really want to see is on the front here, and these two, the adjacent dials, and those are pretty easy to read. This is also a new talking point, and I honestly really like this system. You have, of course, the home menu where you can kind of personalize this page to have different widgets if you want to have navigation, telephony, your media, some basic things that you can always refer to. Then, of course, you have the map and media. You can connect your phone with Apple CarPlay, mind you, and not Android Auto at the moment. You can also configure, for example, the individual driving mode, and you can decide different things if you would like. But you also have certain apps that you can have. So this is a connected car, so you can have live weather updates and online search with Google. This also comes with a lot of assistance systems, including things like the Porsche Active Safe and InnoDrive, wherein you can, for example, if you go to this menu, you can see here the InnoDrive, which will observe the speed limits and it will set that accordingly, so you don't have to worry about getting speeding tickets. Emergency braking, lane keeping assist, park assist, wet detector, as well as matrix LEDs. Lots of nice assistance systems, including a night vision. Then you also have some generic settings, but overall it's nice to have this very useful touchscreen, but it's also really nice to have buttons. And there are enough buttons, and I really like how Porsche always retains these nice toggle switches over here. You even have your own custom shortcut, which you can decide what this function, you can assign a function to this, and you can use this as your own customizable shortcut, which is really cool. The touchscreen is bright, vivid, very responsive. And down here you have the climatization, the climate control. Again, you have toggle switches, really nicely weighted, makes a loud clicking sound, very satisfying to use. And even for the volume knob, you have, well, like I just said, an actual volume knob. And even to kind of toggle between the different settings. So if you go look back up here, and if I go back to this page, you can see that I can use this knob and it kind of switches between all of the different settings. There's a little red box that hops around. So if you really don't want to use the touchscreen, this also has a nice tactile click, nice knurled finish. So everything feels high quality, and this is a great way to have touchscreen as well as hard buttons. Gear shift lever over here, which, yeah, maybe not my favorite part in an otherwise really gorgeous interior. But yeah, as we continue to look over here, a damped glove box, felt lined. You have your own Porsche pen, a nice little touch, which I really appreciate. And unlike the previous generations, or at least unlike the 718, you don't have that central kind of, that flap that opens up with the two cup holders. Instead, you have one cup holder here, which is, in front of the air conditioning vent, so it does get cooled. And it's got a spring-loaded flap to secure it in place, so it is really nice. And you have another cup holder in the middle. So let's talk a little bit about the steering wheel. First of all, the steering wheel can be adjusted electronically for height and reach. You have buttons and rollers, very minimalistic, and again, I think this is a very easy way to execute this. You have controls here for the volume, the voice recognition, and you have controls here to navigate and manipulate the menus on your two digital screens. Right in front of you, you have a very large knob here, a wheel to select the driving mode, and of course the sport response button, which gives you 20 seconds of, a fully primed performance system. Paddle shifters in this gray metal finish, heavy, again, really great weight. Everything has a nice weight to it in a Porsche. Makes a nice, deep, clunky sound when you go back and forth. The seats are also very comfortable. You have a lot of adjustments. You can change the lumbar support, the amount of side bolstering you want in the base, the amount of side bolstering you want on the backrest, the under thigh support. So very adjustable overall. And if you look up here in the center console, they also have ventilation and seat heating. So instead of the 2 cup holders in the dashboard, we saw the one up front, but there's also a second cup holder here, which has really nice spring-loaded clamp, so it will grip whatever drink you put inside. If you don't want this, there's a little button here, and you can remove this altogether for a little bit more cubby space. But nevertheless, you also have more cubby spaces under the central armrest, where you also have a SIM card slot, an SD card, and a couple USB ports. Well, just for your amusement, the Porsche 911 is a 2+2, and this seat is set to my driving position. But when I tumble the seat does not automatically move forward. And, well, again, purely for your amusement, I'm going to try to fit myself back here. And no, even my 5'8" or 1.73 meters, I'm way too large to fit into this. The seat is set to my driving position, and there's no way I could sit behind myself. But there are ISOFIX points on these 2 seats. You could probably fit really small child seats here, but really small children honestly can't fit back here. And ultimately the space that you do get to just be able to sit in and drop your laptop bag or your purse in the back seats just makes it so much more versatile. Let us put the new 911 Turbo through its paces out here on the Hockenheim Ring racetrack. I'm just coming past the start-stop line. It's a really wet track, and we're gonna take it easy, but at the same time try to understand what makes the new 911 Turbo one of the best sports cars ever. First and foremost, I put it into Sport Plus mode, so this gives me a stiffer suspension. It gives me much more faster reaction time with the PDK, and it gives me much better steering feel as well. Overall, the entire car, in terms of the engine response, from throttle pedal, also the all-wheel drive system, everything is adapted to be that much more faster and more responsive. The engine sounds really nice, even though we don't have the sport pack for the exhaust, the sports exhaust pack. So I would say you could skip that if you want to use this on a daily basis. But I think when you have such a glorious engine like that, it's always nice to be able to listen to it. On this wet track, that all-wheel drive really makes a huge difference, especially this car having the big engine out back behind the rear axle. It makes such a big difference. Steering is so great thanks to that rear axle steering as well. It just gives you so much more agility when you need it at slower speeds, at hairpins like that, but also keeps you planted at high-speed corners like this, where you just might lift off a little bit. It makes the car feel so much more planted. If I go into the manual mode, then I can take more control of the 8-speed PDK. Visibility in the coupe is really nice, especially out the front and the side, and the rear visibility is much better than that you get in the cabriolet, because the windshield is much longer. Performance is just blistering. Unfortunately, it's not the right conditions to be able to exploit that. Body is very well controlled. It is quite loud in terms of the road noise and the wind, but I feel really connected with the car. Active aerodynamics also doing its part to help me keep the car in shape. And because of this configuration of the engine and the drivetrain and the powertrain, the 911 Turbo is one of those cars that you can really steer just with the throttle input. So, of course, if you apply more throttle mid-corner, the car starts to go wide. But then you release that, the car tucks in so nicely, and you can get that traction out of the corner much better thanks to the rear engine, and here in this case with the four-wheel drive. The brakes are also very confidence-inspiring. Yeah. Let's try to push it a little bit. Lightning fast gear shifts. The seats are also doing a really great job holding me in place. A lot of safety nets as well to keep me on the track and not in the green or in the gravel. Doing 196, 200, 212, 15. This is one of my favorite sections of the Hockenheimring racetrack. It's a really long, fast straightaway, mild left-hand bend, and then we come up to this hairpin. It's one of those sports cars which you can very easily communicate with. It never gets out of control, it never frightens you, and everything it does is so linear. So by the time you are, in a position where you might be getting into trouble, the car has given you plenty of time and plenty of communication and feedback to make that correction beforehand. So, yeah, the 911 Turbo in this new 992 generation still retains its core DNA, but it just makes everything that much better. Let's put the everyday sports car to the test and see if it really makes sense to have this as a daily driver. By the way, in the cabriolet that we're driving right now out here on the streets, it's not the coupe, so there's a little bit more sound that we hear. Although Porsches always make really good soft tops, and they have a lot of sound deadening. They have a lot of stiff materials on the inside as well, so even though it's fabric on the top, there is a little bit more rigidity and sound insulation, but it's not as good as the coupe. The suspension, on the other hand, is actually fairly compliant and soft, and it, of course, is riding like a sports car, but if you don't have that sports chassis, which has much firmer springs and is lower, the standard Porsche adaptive suspension management system is actually quite a good compromise between comfort and ride handling. The visibility out the front is not too bad at all. Again, because there is no engine in the front, even if you're sitting quite low, the entire car in the front has a low profile, so it's a very easy view out forward. Yes, the windshield is not so large and tall, but nevertheless, it's not a challenge to see out the front. Out the side as well is not too bad, although the front A-pillar is a bit hefty. But what is a bit of a challenge is the visibility out the back. Especially here in the cabriolet, the window is very narrow. It's a very small little gap that you see out the back, and ultimately you have to rely on the parking sensors and the parking cameras, which are really good, by the way. You have 360-degree cameras, you have like a panoramic view that it renders. The quality of the image is also very sharp, so it's really great. But my favorite part about the 911, the Turbo especially, in the city is the rear axle steering. It makes the turning radius shrink so much because at slow speeds, the rear axle turns in the opposite direction as the front axle, which makes the effective turning circle much tighter. And at higher speeds, it turns in the same direction by a couple degrees to kind of virtually extend the wheelbase of the car and therefore make it a lot more composed and a lot more stable and confidence inspiring. But the steering wheel is just, It's beautiful. It just has such great feedback. Porsches make incredible steering, and it's so straightforward. It's such a sharp rack. It gives such great feedback and connection with the road. It's a fast rack, yes, but it doesn't make the car ever feel twitchy or unsettled. And in the normal mode that I'm driving right now, the engine is trying to be composed and calm. It's not loud. Even though I want to hear it, sometimes I want to let it tone down a little bit when I'm driving through built-up areas, and this normal mode really achieves that. Plus it coasts when I let go of the throttle. It shifts up a lot faster, this PDK. So it does have all the basic things that you need in an everyday car covered. Now with the advanced technology in terms of the speed camera, speed sign recognition, lane keeping assist, and adaptive cruise control there as well. If I turn on that system with this button over here, you can see that it does the steering for me. It checks if the speed limit changes, and it will adapt automatically with that. It keeps me in the middle of the lane, so you can even use this on long drives and have that kind of safety net to rely on. But what's really important for me is how well it performs on an everyday basis, on how it makes you feel on a normal drive to office every day. So let's put it into sport mode and put the foot down a little bit. And this is where the 911 character comes to life. The engine is so much more sonorous on the inside. The PDK is lightning fast in its reflexes. The all-wheel drive system ensures that it still has the great rear-wheel drive, rear engine kind of driving characteristic, but it will throw power to the front wheels to help me get more traction, pull me out of a tricky situation. And that acceleration is just blistering. It is really a kind of, it's going to snap your neck in half kind of an acceleration. Of course, out on the streets, you're never going to experience that to its fullest, but on a racetrack, definitely. Other things, for example, are the fact that you have rear seats as well, which are always much more comfortable to have, just not necessarily as a way to carry more passengers, but as a way to have a more practical car to be able to use on an everyday basis to live with. And you can fit children in the back seat. It's not impossible. If you drive this car in an everyday kind of a situation, I'm getting about 11.6 liters for 100 kilometers with highway and city driving. And as we saw in the city, it's very maneuverable thanks to that rear axle steering. The visibility out the back in the Cabriolet is quite poor, but it's much better in the coupe. But what really I'm most interested in is how the 911 Turbo feels to drive on a winding road like this. And we found a gorgeous road. The colors are beautiful. So let's go into Sport Plus. Let's go into manual, drop it down, put our foot down. Instantly. What a rush. And I love the weight of everything in this car. The weight of the gear, the paddle shifters on the steering wheel, the weight of the steering wheel itself, even the button to press change to manual mode. Everything has a heavy weight, and you have to make a decisive action to engage or disengage these systems. And the steering wheel gives you so much feedback. You can feel everything on the road. It's like running your face or your palm across the surface of the road. You can feel that. And even through the seats, I can feel all the minute undulations on the surface of the road. That four-wheel drive traction also means that on a wet surface like this with leaves which are also making the surface of the road quite a lot more slippery, that all-wheel drive system will throw power to the front wheels to pull me out of a tricky situation. In the Sports and Sport Plus mode, the suspension is lowered, the spoiler is raised. So yes, it does feel a lot more stiff and bouncy and jiggly, but this is a 911. I mean, you wouldn't want it to be soft and wallowy. But again, thanks to that adaptive suspension management, if you go into normal mode, it is fairly comfortable, all things considered. But really, What you have at your right foot and at your disposal is not a throttle pedal, but it's a warp drive. It's a teleportation device. You put your foot down and boom, you're at the next corner. And then you attack that corner with this incredibly surgically precision engineered steering. It's like I'm making a fine cut through space and time. It's so much of precision. Even though the new turbo has grown, as it always does with each generation, it still isn't bulky. It doesn't feel like it's too wide for a road like this, which honestly is a very narrow road. And really great visibility, again, to look into that corner. You want to look as far into the street as you can. You can go faster, the higher you can make your line of sight. And another thing, I mean, I'm not going fast at all. I'm going not even 100 really on these streets, but I'm having a great time because it's one of those cars where I don't need to be driving it, you know, at breakneck speed to enjoy it. It's just the overall sensation that just makes the 911 a great car to drive every day. And the turbo really combines that ultimate performance with this luxury, because everything on the interior, like I said as well, is so well built. Everything has a tightness, a tautness, a rigidity to it. Even in this cabriolet, there is no flex. So it is one of the most ultimate. And because this new 992 turbo is as fast and has as much power and torque rather as the previous generation Turbo S, which, you know, already was such a phenomenal car, and we know that, this is actually a great compromise. If you want to get into the turbos and you want one of the most ultimate 911s, you don't have to really stretch for the Turbo S, because with this generation, you're not really missing out too much. Perhaps what I might recommend is, while the engine does sound great on the inside, it can always be better, and I can always do with some more engine sound. And maybe it's a good idea to stretch for that sports exhaust pack after all. I mean, you can hear the turbo, you know, you can hear that whistle and that wastegate, but I could always use a little bit more sound. Oh my goodness. But so much composure, so linear. And because it's a little bit, I mean, everybody knows the 911 has a rear engine, and that means the weight distribution is a little bit different than any of the other sports cars out there. But the good thing about that is it makes it a little bit more approachable, in the sense that if you are starting to push it a bit too hard, it starts understeering, and with that four-wheel drive, it keeps that understeer in check. It becomes more in the sense of, you know, you lose a little bit, start washing out a little bit more rather than losing control. So it's a very gentle reminder to you to, okay, you're maybe pushing it a bit too hard, maybe the road is a bit too wet like it is right now. You know, whereas in a mid-engine car, rear-wheel drive only, you make a mistake, it's going to cut the power immediately, it's going to twitch, you know, it's going to start getting a bit snappy. Or if you have a front engine rear-wheel drive, it's going to start oversteering. But rear engine all-wheel drive means that it's a very safe progression. Yeah, this visibility is getting a bit poor, so unfortunately I don't have the confidence to push further. But again, the controlled interfaces, I can't explain how much I like this, because even the brake pedal, for example, has a really nice weight to it. And it's not a heavy weight in the sense that you have to step on it to make it stop. It's just that you have to, everything you do has to be decisive. And every action you make has a reward. And that's what makes this so gratifying and so, you know, rewarding to drive. One of the few cars out there that really make you feel like this. Well, I mean, if you have the ability to check out a 911 Turbo, you have to. It's one of those things where, you know, it's all about the driving. Even the steering wheel's buttons, there's just enough buttons for you to be able to manipulate these systems on the screen in the front and on to basically the screens in the front and maybe the volume on the main screen, but there isn't more than that. There's nothing else really distracting you. And while it's a bit unfortunate that I cannot see the dials all the way on the left and the right because they're blocked by the steering wheel, I don't really care, because when I'm driving, when I'm in the zone, my eyes are up here all the time. And yeah, it's only when you're driving maybe on the highway and stuff like that that you really can't see these screens. But ultimately, you have the ability to have the navigation on this and all the other information up here, so you're not really missing out on that. But I wish maybe they could have spread the 5 dials out a little bit more, like you see in the older turbos and the older 911s, where maybe I can see at least, half of it is jutting out past the steering wheel. Then I would have been a little bit more happier. But apart from that, I like that big central tacho in the middle. And now it's saying we're doing 13.7 liters for 100 kilometers. So again, it's not something that is terrible. Of course, you can see numbers as high as 20, 30. Really, sky's the limit. But the 911 Turbo really is the everyday sports car. Let's summarize today's episode of the new 992 911 Turbo. Prices for the coupe start at 180,000 euros and prices for the cabriolet start at 194,000 euros. But you add a few options and near as makes no difference. These are both 200,000 cars. They are sports cars, but the Turbo and the Turbo S, of course, they're borderline supercars. So what do you get for this? Well, as always, the Turbo has been about performance, luxury, and usability. Performance-wise, 580 horsepower. I mean, you're really getting a Turbo S from the previous generation in terms of its figures. With that 4-wheel drive, instant acceleration, pretty much, non-existent turbo lag, the performance is, you've got that covered. Trust me on that. And in terms of usability, well, you have a frunk rear axle steering, which makes it really compact in the city, even though, as always, the Turbo is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Still very manageable. The rear seats might not be great for anything other than having kids in the back, but it's good for having a couple, some space to throw in a backpack or a small suitcase. So usability as well covered. In terms of luxury, the interior, as always, has great build quality, great materials, a lot of new technology now, like the adaptive cruise control coupled with the lane keeping assist and the traffic sign recognition, all come together to make this a very semi-autonomous car for driving on the highways. So technology as well helps bring it to the modern age. So overall, if you have 200,000 euros and you like Porsches, the new 992 Turbo is definitely a no-brainer.